The excavation site on the dead world of Giza Secundus smelled of ozone and ancient dust. Millions of tons of rock had been moved by the labor gangs. The workers died by the hundreds every day from exhaustion. Their bodies were fed into the protein recyclers to feed the living. The work could not stop. The order came from the highest level of the imperial court. It bore the personal seal of Malkador the Sigillite. This was not a normal archaeological dig. It was a frantic recovery operation. The atmosphere was tense. Every officer knew that failure meant death. General Chorus looked at the object in the pit. It stood 30 feet tall. It was a perfect ring made of a material the Mechanicus could not identify. It was not adamantium. It was not plasteel. It felt cold to the touch, even under the burning dual suns. Chorus checked his data slate. He had 3 messages from the orbit fleet. They were all demands for updates. The bureaucracy was hungry for results. He wiped sweat from his face. His uniform was stained with salt and grime. He had not slept in 3 days. He was a veteran of the Unification Wars, but this silent stone ring made him tremble. The tech priests of Mars surrounded the ring. They swung heavy censers of burning oil. They chanted to soothe the machine spirit of the device, but the device had no machine spirit they could talk to. It was silent. It ignored their binary prayers. Magos Hestia approached Chorus. Her metal legs clicked on the stone. She said the energy signature was building up. It was not drawing power from the planet. It was drawing power from subspace. She warned that the physics of this area were bending. She was afraid. The Mechanicus did not like technology they did not build. Chorus looked up at the sky. The Imperial fleet hung in low orbit. It was a massive grid of iron and fire. The flagship Bucephalus cast a long shadow over the dig site. The Emperor was watching. Chorus felt the weight of that gaze. It was heavier than the gravity. If they failed to secure this asset, the punishment would not be simple execution. It would be total erasure from history. He signaled his men to hold their positions. The ring suddenly woke up. There was no mechanical grinding. There was only a sudden shift in air pressure. The symbols on the inner track of the ring lit up with orange fire. The ring spun. It moved with a speed that defied its mass. The ground shook. Dust clouds rose up and choked the air filters of the guards. Soldiers raised their weapons. They aimed at the center of the ring. They were trained to shoot xenos and heretics. They were not trained for this. An unstable vortex of blue fluid burst into existence inside the ring. It looked like water, but it stood vertically. It rippled. A blast of cold air hit the general. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in a second. Frost formed on the laser guns. The blue pool stabilized. It became a window. Through the window, Chorus saw another world. He saw a black pyramid under a green sky. He saw thousands of soldiers in silver armor marching in perfect unison. They were not Astartes. They were machines. They had glowing eyes. The Magos screamed a warning. The connection was two-way. The silver machines on the other side stopped marching. They turned their heads. They looked through the gate at the Imperium. They saw the weak flesh of the Imperial army. They raised their weapons. The weapons glowed with the same orange energy as the ring. Chorus realized the mistake too late. They had not found a relic. They had opened a door to a war that had been waiting for 60 million years. The first blast of energy came through the gate. It did not burn. It disintegrated. The soldier next to Chorus vanished into grey ash. The alarm sirens began to wail. The ash of the dead soldier was still floating in the air when the second blast hit. This time it struck a heavy bolter team. The 3 men and their weapon did not explode. They simply unraveled. Their skin turned to dust. Their bones turned to powder. Their metal gun dissolved into grey sand. The pile of dust fell to the ground in silence. General Chorus screamed orders that no one could hear. The roar of the vortex was too loud. The silver machine stepped through the blue water. They walked with a slow and heavy rhythm. Clank, clank, clank. They were tall. They looked like skeletons made of living metal. Their eyes burned with green fire. They held long rifles that glowed with the same sick green light. Chorus grabbed a Voxcaster from a dead operator. He yelled for artillery support. He needed earthshakers. He needed the heavy guns to fire on the pit. The men in the trench next to him were firing their laser guns. The red laser beams hit the silver skeletons. The shots left black scorch marks on the metal, but the machines did not stop. They did not flinch. One of the silver warriors turned its head. It raised its weapon. A beam of green lightning shot out. It raked across the trench line. 10 men vanished. There was no blood. There were no bodies to bury. There was only the smell of ozone and the empty space where brave men had stood. The panicked soldiers began to run. They dropped their rifles. They climbed out of the mud and ran toward the ridge. They were terrified of a death that left no trace. A commissar stood on a crate. He fired his bolt pistol into the air. He shouted about duty and the emperor. He shot a fleeing soldier in the back. The soldier fell. The others kept running. The fear of the green lightning was stronger than the fear of the commissar. Chorus saw the battle line collapsing. The enemy was pushing out of the ring. They were securing the bridgehead. More of them came through the blue puddle. There were dozens now, then hundreds. They formed a phalanx. Their movements were perfectly synchronized. They were a single mind in many bodies. The ground shook as the first Lemon Russ battle tank crested the hill. Its engine roared like a beast. The turret turned. The battle cannon fired. The shells screamed through the air and hit the center of the silver formation. The explosion threw dirt and metal into the air. Chorus cheered. But when the smoke cleared, the silver skeletons were standing up. Their twisted metal limbs were snapping back into place. The dents in their armor popped out. The metal flowed like liquid and healed itself. They were immortal. The tank crew panicked. They fired the heavy bolters in the hull. The explosive rounds bounced off the living metal. The silver warriors returned fire. Green beams stripped the armor off the tank. Layers of plasteel peeled away like onion skin. The tank engine exploded. The crew burned. Magos Hestia was still by the control altar. She was not running. She was recording. Her mecha dendrites were typing furiously on her data slate. She watched the slaughter with cold logic. She saw the energy output of the weapons. She saw the self-repair protocols. She realized that this technology was superior to anything on Mars. It was heresy, but it was beautiful. A stray green shot hit her shoulder. Her metal arm disintegrated. She did not scream. She simply noted the loss of function in her log. She tried to send the data to the ship in orbit. She had to preserve the knowledge. A silver warrior stepped up to her. It looked down at the priest of Mars. It did not speak. It swung a blade attached to its rifle. The Magos fell. Her logic engine went dark. The sky tore open. It was not a storm. It was a teleportation flare. A column of golden light slammed into the ground between the retreating soldiers and the advancing machines. The light was blinding. It forced Chorus to cover his eyes. When the light faded, giants stood in the mud. They were clad in gold armor. They wore tall, conical helmets. They held spears that crackled with blue electricity. The custodes, the bodyguards of the emperor. They did not shout. They moved with a speed that the human eye could barely follow. They charged the silver phalanx. The silver machines fired their green beams. The gold armor of the custodes flared with energy shields. The beams were deflected. The Custodes hit the enemy line. Guardian spears spun in blur of motion. Blades cut through the living metal. The silver skeletons were chopped apart. Heads rolled in the dirt. Limbs were severed. The Custodes did not stop to check if the enemy was dead. They advanced. They pushed the enemy back toward the ring. But the silver machines kept coming. For every one that was cut down, 2 more stepped through the blue gate. The pile of broken metal parts began to twitch. The severed hands tried to crawl back to their bodies. The defeat was temporary. The enemy would not stay dead. Then the psychic pressure hit. It was not a sound. It was a weight on the soul. Every human on the battlefield fell to their knees. It felt like gravity had doubled. Chorus gasped for air. He looked up. A new figure had appeared in the center of the golden giants. He was taller than them. His armor was gold, but it shone with an inner light that was hard to look at. He wore a red cloak that did not move in the wind. He had long, dark hair and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. The Emperor of Mankind had come to the mud. He did not draw a sword. He raised his hand. He pointed at the silver machines. A wave of force erupted from his palm. It was not fire. It was pure will. The wave hit the front row of the silver warriors. They did not disintegrate. They were crushed. The metal crumpled into balls of scrap. The green lights in their eyes went out. The Emperor closed his hand into a fist. The invisible force squeezed. The machine shattered. The parts stopped moving. The reanimation protocols failed. The power of the warp was stronger than their science. The Emperor walked toward the ring. The Custodes formed a circle around him. The silver machines on the other side of the gate hesitated. They calculated the threat level. They saw a being of immense power. They stopped firing. The blue puddle in the ring rippled. The Emperor stood before the gate. He looked into the blue vortex. He did not fear it. He studied it. He saw the geometry. He saw the subspace tunnel. He understood it instantly. This was not magic. This was engineering. It was the same kind of engineering the old ones had used. It was a door to the webway, or something very similar. It was the answer to his great work. He turned to the Custodes. He spoke one word. The word was hold. The Custodes locked their shields together. They formed a wall of gold in front of the gate. The Emperor turned to look at General Chorus. The general was trembling. He tried to stand and salute. The Emperor's eyes were like suns. Chorus felt his mind being scanned. The Emperor saw the battle. He saw the tactics. He saw the failure of the weapons. He saw the bravery of the dead. The Emperor nodded once. It was a validation. Chorus felt his fear vanish. It was replaced by a cold resolve. The immediate crisis was over, but the strategic nightmare had just begun. The gate was still open. The enemy was still on the other side. The Emperor ordered the fleet to hold fire. He did not want the ring destroyed. He wanted it captured. He summoned the surviving tech priests. They came crawling out of the bunkers. They were terrified of the Emperor. He was the Omnissiah, the living god of machines. He pointed at the control pedestal. He told them to interface with it. He told them the code sequence. He pulled the knowledge from the air or from deep memory. The tech priests obeyed. They plugged their data spikes into the alien console. The ring spun. The symbols changed. The blue vortex collapsed. The gate shut down. The connection was broken. Silence returned to the dig site. The only sound was the wind and the crackle of fires. The Emperor did not leave. He established a perimeter. He ordered the construction of a fortress. He named it the Gate of Giza. He called for his sons. He summoned the Primarch of the Imperial Fists, Goa'uld Dawn. He needed a fortress that could never fall. He needed walls that could stop atoms from moving. Dawn arrived within hours. The massive yellow dropship landed in the dust. Dawn walked out. He looked at the ring. He looked at his father. He understood the gravity of the task. He began to draw plans in the dirt with his armored finger. Days turned into weeks. The dead were burned. The ash was cleared. The fortress walls rose up. They were made of adamantium and ceramite. Void shields were installed. The best guns of the Imperium were pointed at the ring. The Emperor remained on the planet. He spent his time in the command bunker. He studied the alien console. He learned the address system. He realized the ring was not a singular device. It was part of a network. There were thousands of them. They were scattered across the galaxy. This changed everything. The Great Crusade moved on ships. Ships were slow. Ships were dangerous. Ships had to go through the warp. The warp was full of demons and madness. The ring was clean. The ring was instant. The Emperor saw a future where humanity did not need navigators. They did not need the Astronomicon. They could step from one world to another in a second. He could unite the galaxy in a single year. But he also saw the danger. The enemy on the other side was ancient. They were the masters of the physical universe. They had awakened. The Emperor convened a war council. Chorus was allowed to attend. He stood in the back, behind the massive forms of the Astartes captains. The Emperor spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the room. He explained the new reality. The Crusade had a new priority. They would not just conquer planets. They would conquer the gates. The first mission was planned. It would not be an invasion. It would be a probe. They needed to know what was on the other side of the network. They needed to find a safe address. The tech priests had found a list of coordinates in the device memory. Many were red. They indicated dead worlds or hostile environments. Some were green. They indicated life support. The Emperor chose a code. It was a world on the fringe of the segmentum solar. It was a world that had been lost during the Age of Strife. He wanted to see if the gate worked for them. The preparations were meticulous. A squad of Terminators from the Imperial Fists was chosen. They wore the heaviest tactical dreadnought armor. They carried storm bolters and power fists. They were walking tanks. A tech marine went with them. He carried scanners and sensor probes. The Emperor stood by the control pedestal. He input the symbols himself. The ring spun. Chevron 1 encoded. Chevron 2 encoded. The ground shook again. The orange fire lit up. The blue vortex whooshed into existence. It was stable. The cold wind blew. The Terminators stepped into the blue water. They did not hesitate. They vanished. The telemetry feeds on the screens flickered. For a second, there was static. Then, the image cleared. The screen showed a dense jungle. The sky was purple. There were ruins of a human city in the distance. The air was breathable. There were no silver machines. The squad leader reported in. His voice was clear. No distortion. No psychic screaming from the warp. They had traveled 500 light years in a single step. The room was silent. The generals looked at the map. They looked at the screen. The implication hit them. The logistics officers began to weep. The supply lines could be instantaneous. Ammunition could be sent from the forge directly to the front line. Reinforcements could arrive before the enemy finished reloading. It was the ultimate strategic advantage. But the Emperor did not smile. He knew that if he could use the roads, so could the enemy. The gates were two-way doors. If the Imperium opened a gate to a hostile world, the invasion could come straight to Terra. He ordered the establishment of the Stargate Command. It would be a new branch of the military. It would answer only to him and Malkador. No other High Lord would have authority. The Mechanicus would maintain the device, but they would not control it. The Custodes would guard the Giza Gate forever. It was now the most important square mile in the Imperium. The first catastrophe happened 3 days later. The excitement had made them bold. They dialed a new address. It was a world listed as a resource depot. The probe went through. It showed a metallic hallway. It looked safe. A platoon of Imperial Army soldiers was sent through to secure the area. They stepped through the puddle. The gate stayed open. Chorus watched the video feed. The soldiers spread out. They were in a vast underground complex. Then the lights in the hallway turned red. A gas vented from the ceiling. It was not poison. It was a nano cloud. The soldiers started to scream. The cloud ate their armor. It ate their flesh. It turned them into grey sludge in seconds. The transmission cut. The gate shut down from the other side. Chorus stared at the blank screen. 50 men dead in a minute. The Emperor did not look away. He ordered the address locked out. He ordered a quarantine protocol. Nothing comes back through the gate without a bioscan. Nothing comes back without an iris code. They built a mechanical iris over the Giza Gate. It was a shutter made of trillium alloy. It could close in less than a second. It would stop anything from materializing. It was the shield against the universe. The Emperor realized that the Stargate network was a trap as much as it was a road. It was full of tests. It was full of enemies. The Necrons, he named them now using the ancient Aldari word he remembered, were waking up. They used the gates to harvest life. The Imperium had just kicked their nest. The Emperor knew he had to move fast. He had to secure the key nodes before the Necrons fully awoke. He issued a new decree. The Great Crusade would split. Horus would command the fleet in the conventional war. The Emperor would return to Terra to study the Webway project, but he would leave a special force at Giza. He selected a new commander for the Stargate operations. It was not a Primarch. A Primarch was too valuable to lose in a random trap. It was a human. It was General Chorus. The Emperor valued Chorus because he had seen the horror and held the line. He gave Chorus a new rank, Gate Lord. Chorus was given authority to requisition any resource. He was given a regiment of stormtroopers. He was given a detachment of Mechanicus adepts who were sworn to silence. The mission was simple. Find the technology, find the weapons, find the maps, destroy the enemies. Chorus accepted the command. He looked at the ring. It was quiet now. It looked like a tombstone. He knew that he would probably die on the other side of that water, but he also knew that this ring was the only way humanity would survive the encirclement of the galaxy. The logistics of the gate were difficult. You could not drive a Baneblade through it. It was too small. You could not fly a Thunderhawk through it. The wings were too wide. This changed the doctrine of war. The Imperial Army was used to massive scale. They were used to crushing enemies with weight. Now they had to be small. They had to be fast. They had to carry everything on their backs or on small carts. The Emperor ordered the design of new vehicles. Small six-wheeled rovers with heavy stubbers, fast attack bikes. The logic of war shrank from the macro to the micro. A single squad became more important than a battalion. The first major off-world base was established on the jungle world they had found. They named it Alpha Site. They poured concrete. They built bunkers. They moved supplies through the gate in a constant stream. Day and night, the gate spun. Men carried boxes, carts rolled through. The jungle world became a fortress. It was the jumping-off point. From there, they could dial other worlds without risking Giza. It was a buffer zone. But the galaxy was listening. The activation of the gates sent ripples through the subspace. On a world far away, deep in the halo stars, a silent king sat on a throne of obsidian. He felt the tremor in the network. He saw a gate activate that had been dormant for 60 million years. He saw the primitive energy signature of the humans. He saw the golden psychic light of the Emperor. The Silent King did not feel fear. He felt annoyance. The vermin were playing with the keys to the library. He sent a signal to his tomb worlds. He woke the Phaerons. He woke the Cryptex. The harvest was starting early. Back on Giza, the astropaths began to scream. They were the psychic communicators of the Imperium. They fell to the floor, bleeding from their eyes. They felt a shadow moving across the stars. It was not chaos. It was not the warp. It was a cold, hard static. It was the sound of 1 billion machines powering up. The Emperor felt it too. He stood on the walls of the Giza fortress. He looked at the stars. He knew the race had begun. He had the gate, but the enemy had the map. He had the will, but the enemy had the time. General Chorus walked up to the Emperor. He held a data slate. "My lord," he said, "the tech priests have found something. The symbols on the gate. They are not just random coordinates. They are grouped by sector. There is a cluster of addresses that are very close to the galactic core. The energy readings from those addresses are off the scale. The Margos thinks there is a central hub, a command center for the whole network." The Emperor looked at the data. He saw the pattern. "Atlantis," he whispered. It was an old word from old Earth, a myth of a lost city. If we control the hub, we control the network. If we control the network, we control the galaxy. He looked at Chorus. "Prepare the teams. We are not just exploring anymore. We are hunting." Chorus nodded. He turned to leave. He walked past the rows of soldiers cleaning their weapons. They were checking their power packs. They were sharpening their bayonets. They looked tired, but they looked ready. They were the gatewalkers. They were the first of a new breed. Chorus looked at the ring one last time. The orange lights were dim. The blue water was gone. It was just a stone circle. But Chorus knew it was the mouth of a beast, and they were about to climb inside. A perimeter alarm at Alpha Site. The gate at Giza spun up. Incoming wormhole. The iris slammed shut. Something hit the metal shield with the force of a nuclear bomb. The mountain shook. The Emperor did not blink. The war was on. The logistical nightmare of the Alpha Site began immediately after the first victory. The Imperium was an engine that burned supplies. It needed food, fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. Moving an army through a ring that was only 30 feet wide was like trying to push an ocean through a straw. The quartermasters at Giza screamed at the laborers. Every box had to be measured. If a crate was too wide, it jammed the ramp. If a vehicle was too heavy, it cracked the mounting brackets of the receiving platform. The line of men waiting to walk through the blue puddle stretched for miles across the desert of Giza. They stood in the heat. They prayed. They waited to step onto a world they had never seen. General Chorus stood in the command bunker on Alpha Site. The jungle outside was being cut down. Massive yellow bulldozers flattened the alien trees. The air was thick with humidity and the smoke of Prometheum engines. Chorus looked at the map of the galaxy. The tech priests had decoded more addresses. They had found a cluster of worlds rich in minerals. One world, designated PX-99, showed signs of a hyper-dense ore. The Mechanicus believed this ore could amplify the output of void shields. They demanded it. The High Lords of Terror demanded it. The Emperor had given Chorus a quota. The war machine needed to eat. Chorus authorized the mission. It was not a probe. It was an extraction force. He assigned the 4th Cadian Regiment. These were shock troops. They were disciplined. They were led by Colonel Raken. Along with them, he sent a detachment of the Imperial Fists, 10 Astartes. 10 giants in yellow armor to ensure the compliance of whatever they found. The mission parameters were simple. Go through, secure the area, establish a mining camp, ship the ore back. It was a standard operation. It was the kind of thing the Imperium did every day. The gate at Alpha Site spun. The chevron locked. The vortex opened. Colonel Raken walked through first. His boots hit the sand of PX-99. It was a desert world. The sun was red and swollen. The heat was oppressive. In the distance, there were dunes of red sand, and there were structures. They were not ruins. They were pyramids. They were smooth and covered in gold. They reflected the red sun. Raken signaled the all clear. The troops poured through the gate. They set up a perimeter. They dug trenches in the sand. They set up heavy bolters pointing at the pyramids. The 10 Imperial Fists marched through last. Their heavy boots crunched on the sand. Sergeant Dornus led them. He scanned the horizon. His helmet sensors picked up energy readings from the pyramids. They were high, very high. He did not like it. He told Raken to dig deeper. The soldiers worked fast. They were afraid of the Space Marines. They wanted to look busy. The mining equipment came through, drills and lasers. The Mechanicus adepts started scanning the ground. They found the ore. It was everywhere. It was Naquada. It was a superconductor of immense power. The first sign of trouble was a sound. It was a high-pitched whine that dropped from the sky. Raken looked up. He saw a shape. It looked like a bird of prey made of gold. It was a fighter craft. It moved with an impossible grace. It did not have engines that burned fuel. It had gravity drives. It hovered over the gate. The soldiers raised their laser guns. They waited for orders. Raken hailed the craft on all frequencies. He demanded identification in the name of the Emperor. The craft did not answer. It opened fire. Staff cannons mounted on the wings spit bolts of orange plasma. The plasma was hot, hotter than the sun. It hit the ground and exploded like a grenade. Sand turned to glass. Men were vaporized. The shockwave knocked Raken into the trench. The Cadians returned fire. Hundreds of red laser beams struck the golden ship. They bounced off. The ship had a shield. It was an energy skin that absorbed the light. The pilot of the ship laughed. His voice was amplified by speakers. He spoke in a language that sounded like snakes hissing. Sergeant Dornus did not wait. He raised his bolt gun. He fired a stream of explosive rockets at the cockpit. The bolts hit the shield. They detonated. The shield flared. It flickered. The pilot pulled the ship up. He was surprised by the force of the weapon. The Space Marines were a threat. The ship looped around for another pass. More ships descended from the clouds. There were dozens of them. They swarmed like angry wasps. They strafed the Imperial lines. The trench line became a slaughterhouse. The Cadians died bravely. They stood their ground and fired until they melted. But they could not hit the fast-moving targets. They needed anti-aircraft guns. But the Hydra flak tanks were still on Alpha Site. They were too big to fit through the gate easily. They were being disassembled to be shipped in pieces. The logistics bottleneck had become a death sentence. Raken screamed into the Vox. He called for retreat. He ordered everyone back to the gate. But the gate was dead. The blue puddle was gone. The enemy had done something. They had dialed the gate from another world. They had locked the connection. The gate on PX-99 could not dial out because it was receiving an incoming signal. But nothing was coming through. It was just an open line, a busy signal. It was a jammer. They were trapped. The pyramids opened. Doors slid up. An army marched out. They were humans, but they were wrong. They wore armor that looked like snakes and jackals. They carried long staffs tipped with glowing orange eggs. They marched in perfect lines. There were thousands of them. They were the Jaffa, the soldiers of the System Lords. They did not fear death. They believed their master was a god, and they had come to punish the heretics who dared to touch the sacred stone. The ground war began. It was brutal. The Jaffa staff weapons were slow, but they were powerful. One shot could blow a hole through flak armor. A hit to the chest was fatal. The Cadians fired back. Their laser guns cut down the Jaffa. The Jaffa armor was ceremonial. It did not stop the lasers. But for every Jaffa that fell, 10 more took his place. They had the numbers, and they had the air support. The gliders continued to bomb the trenches. Sergeant Dornus rallied the survivors. He gathered the Imperial Fists. They formed a circle around the command post. They became a fortress of yellow ceramite. Their bolters roared. Every shot was a kill. The Jaffa broke against them like water on rock. Dornus saw a large vehicle hovering toward them. It was a golden barge. On the throne sat a figure. He was tall. He wore a mask of a snarling jackal. He glowed with a personal shield. He was the lord of this world. He was a false god. Dornus felt a cold rage. The Imperium existed to destroy false gods. He charged. He ran out of the trench. He ran through the plasma fire. His armor took hits. The yellow paint was scorched black. The ceramite cracked, but he did not stop. He reached the barge. He jumped. He used his jump pack to launch himself into the air. He landed on the deck of the barge. The Jaffa guards attacked him. He smashed them with his power fist. He crushed their skulls. He tore their staffs from their hands. He stood before the false god. The figure stood up. He raised the hand. He wore a ribbon device made of gold. A shockwave of kinetic energy hit Dornus. It was like being hit by a train. The Space Marine was thrown backward. He fell off the barge. He hit the sand hard. His armor systems flashed red warnings, internal bleeding, broken ribs. He tried to stand. The Jackal Lord laughed. He pointed his hand again. He tortured the Space Marine. He held him in a grip of invisible pain. The Cadians watched in horror. Their angel of death was being humiliated. Their morale broke. The line collapsed. The Jaffa surged forward. They captured the trenches. They captured the supplies. They captured the wounded. Colonel Raken was dragged to his knees. He looked at the gate. It was still blocked. There was no escape. On Alpha Site, General Chorus watched the iris. It was closed. The computer showed that the gate on PX-99 was active, but not connected to them. It was locked out. He knew what that meant. His men were dying. He paced the room. He demanded options. The tech priest said there was nothing to do. The physics of the wormhole prevented a second connection. They had to wait for the enemy to hang up. Chorus slammed his fist on the table. "We are the Imperium," he shouted. "We do not wait." He ordered the psychers to the room. He had a choir of astropaths. He told them to send a message through the warp, not to the soldiers, but to the enemy. He wanted to scream into their minds. It was a desperate move. The warp was dangerous, but Chorus was desperate. The astropaths joined hands. They focused on the coordinates of PX-99. They pushed a message of pain and fire. On the desert world, the Jackal Lord flinched. He felt the psychic scream. It was raw and ugly. It was the sound of 1 billion souls crying out. It distracted him. The invisible grip on Dornus loosened. The Space Marine dropped to the ground. He gasped for air. He triggered his transhuman physiology. He forced his body to ignore the pain. He grabbed a grenade from his belt. It was a crack grenade, anti-armor. He did not throw it. He primed it. He looked at the barge. He looked at Raken. Raken understood. The colonel nodded. It was the only way. Dornus charged the barge again, not to board it, but to get under it. He slid across the sand. He jammed the grenade into the anti-gravity drive emitter. He rolled away. The explosion was deafening. The drive failed. The golden barge tilted and crashed into the sand. The false god was thrown from his throne. The distraction broke the enemy's concentration. The connection on the gate dropped. The lock was released. The gate on PX-99 shut down. The dial tone was gone. Immediately, Chorus on Alpha side ordered the redial. "Dial it now," he screamed. "Send the nuke." The plan had changed. Rescue was impossible. The enemy was too strong. The only option was denial. They could not let the enemy capture the Astartes gene seed. They could not let them take the equipment. It was the hardest decision a commander could make. It was exterminatus on a tactical scale. The tech priest punched the address. The ring spun. Chevron 1, Chevron 2. On the desert world, Dornus saw the ring spin. He knew what was coming. He grabbed Raken. "Fight," he said. "Fight until the end." They stood back to back. The Jaffa were recovering. The false god was standing up, his personal shield flaring. He was angry now. His eyes glowed. He shouted a command. The Jaffa raised their weapons to execute the prisoners. The gate whooshed open, but no soldiers came through. No tanks. Only a single metal cylinder. It slid down the ramp. It had a timer on the side. It was a Mark 9 fusion warhead. It counted down from 10 seconds. Dornus looked at the bomb. He looked at the false god. He removed his helmet. He spat blood onto the sand. "For the Emperor," he whispered. The false god looked at the device. He did not understand Imperial technology. He thought it was a tribute. He stepped toward it. The white light consumed everything. The explosion vaporized the pyramids. It turned the sand into a crater of glass 5 miles wide. The Jaffa, the Cadians, the Space Marines, and the false god were instantly erased. The shockwave hit the open wormhole. Fire billowed through the gate back to Alpha Site. The iris slammed shut just in time. The mountain shook. The heat sensors spiked. Then silence. Chorus stared at the metal iris. He heard the thud of the explosion against the shield. He had just killed 4,000 of his own men. He had killed 10 Space Marines. He sank into his chair. The room was dead silent. No one spoke. The cost of the war had just been paid. The aftermath was bitter. The report went to Terra. The Emperor read it in his laboratory. He did not show emotion. He analyzed the tactical data. The enemy had air superiority. The enemy had shields that resisted last fire. The enemy could block the gate. This required a doctrinal shift. The human wave tactic did not work when the funnel was so small. They needed better weapons. They needed shielding. The Mechanicus took the loss as a challenge. They had scanned the Jaffa staff weapons before the feed cut. They saw the plasma technology. It was crude but effective. They wanted it. They petitioned the Emperor to capture a weapon intact. They wanted to reverse engineer the power source. The Emperor agreed. Adaptation was necessary. But the true catastrophe was not the loss of life. It was the loss of secrecy. The false god, Apophis, the name was identified from the intercept, had survived. His personal shield and his sarcophagus technology had saved him at the last second, or he had escaped via a teleport ring before the blast. The reports were unclear, but a message was received on the subspace frequencies days later. It was a hologram. It projected into the command center at Giza. The face of Apophis appeared. He was beautiful and terrible. He looked at Chorus. He looked at the camera. "You have stung the gods," he said. His voice was distorted, layered with a deep, guttural tone. "You are pests. We will come for your world. We will enslave your children. We will blot out your sons." The transmission ended. Chorus realized the scale of the error. They were not fighting a scattered xenos tribe. They were fighting a galaxy-spanning empire of slavers, and the Imperium was stuck on one planet, peering through a keyhole. The morale at Alpha Side plummeted. The soldiers whispered about the gods who could stop laser beams with their hands. The commissars had to work overtime. Executions for cowardice increased. The fear of the unknown was spreading. Chorus knew he needed a victory. He needed to prove that these gods could bleed. He went to the prison block. They had captured a single prisoner from a previous skirmish, a creature they called a Unas. It was a large reptilian beast. It was strong. The Mechanicus had been dissecting its kin. Chorus looked at the beast. It had a parasite in its neck, a snake. Chorus realized the truth. The god was not the body. The god was the worm. He called for a briefing. He put the image of the dissected worm on the main screen. "This is your god," he told the officers. "It is a parasite. It is a slug. It wraps around the spine and controls the mind." He pointed to the screen. "You do not fear a slug. You step on it." The room changed. The fear turned to disgust. Disgust was good. Disgust was a weapon of the Imperium. "They are not gods," Chorus said. "They are xenos horrificus, and they are stealing human bodies to hide their weakness." The revelation changed the war. It became a holy war. The doctrine of suffer not the alien to live applied perfectly. The gods were just worms in meat suits. The Space Marines of the Imperial Fists took this personally. To usurp the human form was the ultimate insult to the Emperor's design. Rogel Dawn arrived at Giza. The Primarch was stone-faced. He had heard of the loss of his sons. He did not mourn. He calculated. He inspected the gate. He inspected the defenses. "The gate is a wall," he said. "But a wall must have towers." He ordered the construction of forward operating bases on every world they dialed. No more open camps. Every step through the gate would be a step into a bunker. He also brought a gift from Mars. The Mechanicus had been busy. They could not fit a lemon rust tank through the gate easily. So they had stripped it. They removed the hull. They removed the heavy tracks. They built a skeleton tank. It was just the engine, the gun, and a roll cage. It looked like a buggy, but it carried a battle cannon. They called it the Gatebreaker. It was fast. It was ugly. It fit through the ring. Dawn looked at Chorus. "We go back," he said. "Not to PX-99. That is dead. We go to the source of the signal. We go to Chulak." Chorus hesitated. "That is a recruitment world, my lord. Heavily defended." Dawn nodded. "Good. Then they will have many warriors to die." The catastrophe of PX-99 had hardened the Imperium. They stopped treating the Stargate program as an archaeological dig. It was now a crusade front. The simple green fatigues of the explorers were replaced by carapace armor. The laser guns were fitted with hotshot packs. The innocence of discovery was gone. The galaxy was full of monsters, and the Imperium had decided to become the bigger monster. But the supply issue remained. They were burning resources faster than they could find them. The rations were cut. The paperwork for ammunition requests tripled. Soldiers were reusing bandages. The grime of the war was setting in. Chorus saw it in the faces of his staff. They were tired. They were thin. The glory of the crusade felt very far away. Here there was only the dust, the dial, and the dread of what would come through the water next. A new problem arose. The gate on Giza began to activate randomly. No wormhole formed. Just the lights. The chevrons locked and unlocked. Someone was dialing in, testing the line, testing the iris. The enemy was probing back. They were looking for a weakness in the shield. The sound of the gate spinning became a torture. It happened every hour. Spin, lock, fail, spin, lock, fail. It was psychological warfare. Sleep became impossible. Chorus sat in his office, listening to the spin. He poured a glass of Amasec. His hand shook slightly. He looked at the picture of the Emperor on the wall. "We open the door," he whispered to the picture. "God help us. We open the door." He didn't know that on the other side of the galaxy, Apophis was meeting with the other System Lords. They were sitting at a table made of floating stone. They were discussing the Tauri, the people of the First World. They were arguing. Cronus wanted to destroy Earth immediately. Baal wanted to study them. You wanted to ignore them. But they all agreed on one thing. The Tauri were dangerous. They had no honor. They used nuclear fire as a greeting. They were a cancer. And the System Lords decided to cut it out. They voted to assemble a combined fleet, not to attack Earth directly. They didn't have the address yet. But to scour the sector, to burn every world that smelled of humanity until they found the nest. The second catastrophe was not a battle. It was the realization that the clock was ticking. The Imperium had started a fire, and the wind was blowing toward Terra. The assault on Chulak was not a battle. It was an execution. The gate-breaker tanks roared through the wormhole first. They hit the stone ramp on the other side with a screech of metal. The Jaffa guards at the Chulak gate were expecting a probe. They were expecting foot soldiers. They were not expecting 10 tons of engine and gun. The first tank fired a high-explosive shell. It hit the base of the gate dial. The explosion threw stone and Jaffa bodies into the air. The tank did not stop. It drove over the burning debris. The tracks ground the enemy armor into the dirt. Rogal Dorn walked through the fire. He did not run. He carried a stormbolter in one hand and his massive chainsword in the other. The chainsword was roaring. The teeth of the blade spun so fast they were a blur. A Jaffa warrior charged him. The warrior shouted the name of his god. Dorn did not look at him. He swung the sword. The Jaffa was cut in half. The cut was clean. The top half of the body flew to the right. The bottom half fell to the left. Dorn kept walking. He was looking for the fortress. The sky of Chulak was filled with death gliders. They swooped down like hawks. They fired their plasma cannons. The ground exploded around the Space Marines. But the Imperium had learned. The gate breakers had Hydra flak cannons mounted on the rear. The quad guns tracked the gliders. They filled the air with flak shells. The sky turned into a cloud of black smoke and shrapnel. A glider flew into the cloud. It came out in pieces. A wing sheared off. It spiraled down and crashed into the forest. General Chorus watched the battle from the rear. He was on a command rhino. He saw the efficiency of the Astartes. It was terrifying. The Jaffa fought with honor. They stood in lines. They announced their attacks. The Astartes fought with math. They calculated the angle of fire. They maximized the kill zone. They did not care about honor. They cared about victory. The Jaffa lines broke. They had never seen an enemy that did not fear their staffs. Their plasma bolts hit the Space Marine armor and left black marks. But the Marines did not fall. The Marines fired back. Their bolts were rocket-propelled. They penetrated the Jaffa armor and exploded inside the chest cavity. It was messy. It was brutal. The city of Chulak lay ahead. It was a city of gold and stone. It was beautiful. Dorn looked at it and saw only a target. He ordered the artillery to set up. The Earthshaker cannons had been dragged through the gate by teams of sweating Ogrins. The big abhumans pulled the chains. Their muscles bulged. They ignored the heat. The guns were leveled. The target coordinates were the palace. Gee! The shelling began. The sound was like thunder that never stopped. Shells rained down on the city. Towers crumbled. Statues of Apophis were shattered. The civilians ran. The Imperium did not target them intentionally, but they did not stop firing to save them. The mission was to break the will of the enemy. Smoke rose from the city in a black pillar. It could be seen for miles. Inside the palace, Apophis was screaming. He was not there in person, but his hologram was projecting into the throne room. He was shouting at his first prime. The first prime was a tall man with a gold symbol melted into his forehead. His name was Teal'c. He listened to his god scream. He saw the city burning. He saw the soldiers of the Tauri, the Imperium, advancing like a glacier of grey and yellow. Apophis ordered Teal'c to take the elite guard and die for him. "Kill them all," Apophis shouted. "Bring me their heads." Teal'c looked at the hologram. He looked at the window. He saw the devastation. He saw a giant in yellow armor rip the turret off a defensive tower with his bare hands. Teal'c had served Apophis for 100 years. He had done terrible things. He believed Apophis was a god because Apophis was powerful. But this yellow giant was more powerful. And the giant did not ask for worship. He asked for ammunition. Teal'c made a choice. It was not a choice for freedom. It was a tactical choice. If Apophis could not stop this, Apophis was not a god. Teal'c picked up his staff weapon. He did not rally the guard to attack. He rallied them to hold position. He walked out of the palace gates alone. He held his weapon horizontally over his head. It was a gesture of parley. Dawn saw the lone warrior. He signaled the tanks to hold fire. The noise of the battle died down. The only sound was the burning city and the hum of the power armor. Dawn walked up to Teal'c. The Primarch towered over the Jaffa. Teal'c was a big man, but to Dawn, he was a child. Dawn looked down. His helmet lenses glowed red. "Speak," Dawn said. His voice was like grinding stones. Teal'c looked up. He did not kneel. "I am Teal'c, first prime of Apophis. I see your strength. My god screams in fear. A god does not scream." Dawn looked at the gold seal on Teal'c's head. "He is not a god. He is a xenos parasite, and you are his slave." "I am a warrior," Teal'c said. "I wish to serve the strongest. Today, you are the strongest." Dawn considered this. The Imperium hated aliens, but the Imperium also used tools. This man knew the enemy. He knew the maps. He knew the codes. Dawn made a calculation. "You will not serve me," Dawn said. "You will serve the Emperor, and your service will be pain. You will bleed for him. You will betray your kind. And if you hesitate, I will crush you." Teal'c nodded. "I accept." It was the first crack in the Goa'uld Empire. The defection of the first prime was a shockwave. The Jaffa soldiers watched their leader lower his weapon. They were confused. Their faith was shaken. Some dropped their weapons. Others fired in a panic. The Space Marines killed the ones who fired. They took the others prisoner. The battle for Chulak ended not with a treaty, but with a harvest. The Imperium stripped the city. This was the true mission. The Mechanicus descended like locusts. They took the staff weapons. They took the healing devices. They cut the hyperdrives out of the gliders. They found the larvae tanks. The tanks were full of baby Goa'uld symbiotes. The Mechanicus did not want to save them. They wanted to study them. They put the white, snake-like creatures into jars of formaldehyde. They loaded them onto carts. General Chorus oversaw the looting. He was tired. His uniform was torn. He had not eaten a hot meal in weeks. The rations were tasting like chalk. The water from the gate travel always tasted metallic. He watched the soldiers loading the crates. They looked exhausted. Their eyes were hollow. They were winning, but the war was eating them alive. A soldier dropped a crate of crystals. Chorus didn't yell. He just sighed. He picked up the crate himself. "Careful, son," he said. "That's worth more than your planet." The looting of Chulak had a consequence that Chorus did not foresee. The System Lords were arrogant, but they were not stupid. They saw the fall of Chulak as an existential threat. They stopped fighting each other. Kronos, Baal, Nirati, and Yu met in a secret station in the Hasara system. They agreed on a truce. They agreed to form a grand fleet. They did not know where Earth was, but they knew where the attacks were coming from. They began to hunt for the point of origin. They began to torture captured humans on other worlds to find the address of Giza. But the real threat was not the aliens. It was the method of travel. The Emperor had warned them about the warp, the Stargate to use subspace, a tunnel through the fabric of reality. It was supposed to be clean, but the Imperium was not clean. The Imperium was psychically loud. The incident happened on the return trip from Chulak. A heavy transport was bringing back the spoils of war. It was carrying a squad of wounded soldiers and a sanctioned psyker, a Primaris psyker named Malak. Malak was exhausted. His mind was open. He was suffering from the headaches that all psykers get when they are near the Necron pylons. But here, near the gate, it was different. It was a buzzing. The transport entered the event horizon. The blue water swallowed it. Inside the wormhole, the laws of physics were suspended. Usually, the trip took seconds. You saw a flash of blue light, and you were home. But this time, Malak screamed. His mind touched the walls of the wormhole. His psychic potential flared. He was a beacon. In the space between spaces, something noticed. It was not a Goa'uld. It was something older. It was a denizen of the warp. The wormhole tunnel passed too close to a tear in the veil. The psychic scream of Malak acted like a grappling hook. The entity latched onto the wormhole. The blue tunnel turned purple. The smooth ride became a violent shake. The transport exited at Giza, but it did not come out clean. The metal of the transport was fused with meat. The soldiers inside were not human anymore. They were a single, writhing mass of flesh and steel. Faces screamed from the hull of the tank. Limbs grew out of the gun barrels. It was a spawn of chaos. The creature, the thing that used to be a transport, flopped onto the concrete ramp of the Giza gate. It wailed. It lashed out with tentacles made of intestines and drive chains. The soldiers in the gate room froze. They had seen aliens. They had seen death. They had not seen this. The siren wailed. Corruption. Corruption. The intricate alarm system designed by the Inquisition triggered. The automated heavy bolters in the ceiling spun up. They fired. The explosive rounds hit the flesh tank. Blood and oil sprayed everywhere. The creature did not die. It absorbed the bullets. It began to vomit a pink mist. The mist was warp spore. General Chorus was in the observation booth. He saw the horror. He slammed the quarantine button. The blast doors slammed shut, sealing the gate room. The soldiers inside were trapped with the beast. Chorus watched on the monitor. He saw his men firing their laser guns. The lasers burned the flesh, but the flesh grew back instantly. The pink mist filled the room. The soldiers started to cough. Then they started to change. Horns grew from their skulls. Their eyes turned black. They turned on each other. "Purge it," Chorus whispered. "Purge it all." He turned the key for the venting system. He opened the valves to the plasma incinerators installed in the walls. Jets of blue fire flooded the gate room. The temperature rose to 3,000 degrees. The cameras melted. The screaming stopped. The room was sterilized. When the fire died down, there was nothing left but ash and slag. The Emperor felt the breach from his lab on Terra. He teleported to Giza instantly. He appeared in the command center. His face was thunder. He looked at Chorus. He looked to the gate. "The barrier is thin," the Emperor said. "The gate travels through the domain of the Neverborn. Every time you dial, you risk their attention, and you sent a psyker through. Chorus fell to his knees. We did not know, my lord. The psyker was sanctioned. The warp does not care for sanctions, the Emperor said. The wormholes are not shielded against the soul sea. The ancients who built this, they had no souls like ours. They were calm. Humans are a fire in the warp. We attract sharks. This was the strategic chain reaction. The Imperium had a weapon they could barely use. If they sent troops, they risked corruption. If they didn't send troops, the Goa'uld would regroup. The Emperor had to make a change. He needed a filter. He needed a Geller field for the Stargate. He ordered the Mechanicus to stop all gate travel. The war came to a grinding halt. The supplies on the off-world bases stopped arriving. Alpha Site was cut off. The soldiers there were stranded. They had food for 2 weeks. They had ammo for one major fight. And the System Lords were coming. On Alpha Site, Colonel Raken, who had survived the previous disaster, was in charge. He looked at the gate. It was dead. The DHD, dial home device, was locked out from Earth. He didn't know why. He only knew that the sky was filling with enemy ships. The truce of the System Lords had borne fruit. A fleet of Hatak motherships had found Alpha Site. They were not here to invade. They were here to bombard. Raken rallied his men. "Dig in," he shouted. "Deep Earth. We hold until the Emperor opens the door." The orbital bombardment began. Plasma bolts the size of houses hit the jungle. The trees vaporized. The bunkers shook. Dirt rained from the ceiling. The power went out. The soldiers sat in the dark, clutching their laser guns. They wrote letters to their families that would never be sent. They prayed. The sound of the explosions was a constant rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. Back on Earth, the Emperor was working. He was building a device. A psychic dampener. A mini Geller field generator that could be attached to the gate frame. It required gold. It required rare crystals. It required the blood of a blank, a pariah who had no soul. He used the Sisters of Silence. He drained their essence into the machine. It was a grim task. The machine hummed with a null aura. It took 3 days. 3 days of silence from Alpha Site. 3 days of the System Lords pounding the jungle world into glass. When the device was finally installed on the Giza Gate, the Emperor signaled Chorus. "Dial." Chorus dialed Alpha Site. The gate spun. The wormhole opened. It looked different now. It was grayer. The water was calm. The null field was working. It pushed the warp away from the tunnel. "Send the relief force," Chorus ordered. But when the probe went through, it showed nothing. The camera panned across the landscape. There was no jungle. There was no bunker. There was only a crater. The Alpha Site was gone. The System Lords had not just bombed it. They had used a Naquadda-enhanced nuke. They had cracked the crust of the planet. Raken and his 5,000 men were dust. The loss was total. The System Lords sent a message through the open gate. It was a radio signal. It was simple. "We are united. You are alone." The strategic picture had inverted. The Imperium had lost its forward base. They had lost the element of surprise. The enemy was united, and the warp was knocking at the door. But the Emperor saw something else. He saw the pattern of the enemy fleet. They had moved all their ships to the Alpha Site sector to destroy it. They had left their own worlds lightly defended. The Emperor looked at the map. He looked at Dawn. "They think like feudal lords," the Emperor said. "They gather their strength in one place to show power. They leave their backs exposed." "We strike their homes?" Dawn asked. "No," the Emperor said. "We strike their shipyard, the place where they build the motherships. We take away their ability to project power." The target was Tartarus, a heavy industrial world controlled by Sokka. Sokka was a System Lord who pretended to be the devil. He used imagery of hellfire and damnation. The Emperor found this amusing. "He mimics the Chaos Gods," the Emperor said. "Let us show him the difference between a pretender and the true master of mankind." The mission to Tartarus would be different. No tanks, no massive armies. The gate on Tartarus was inside a supermax prison. It was shielded. You couldn't just drive through. You had to infiltrate. The Emperor authorized the deployment of the Officio Assassinorum. He called for a Colexus assassin, a soulless horror, a weapon against fear, and he called for the newly formed SG-1. SG-1 was not an exploration team. It was a kill team. It was led by a captain of the Custodes, Shield Captain Valeris. It included a tech priest of the Myrmidon cult, heavily augmented for war. It included Teal Ser, the traitor who knew the prison layout, and it included the assassin. Their mission was not to capture. It was to destabilize, to blow the reactor of the shipyard, to release the prisoners, to start a slave revolt that would burn Sokka's empire from the inside. They geared up in the Giza embarkation room. The mood was dark. There were no cheers. The men cleaning the blood from the floor where the Chaos Thing had died looked at the elite team with fear. Valeris checked his guardian spear. Teal checked his staff weapon. He had kept it, preferring it to the bolter. The assassin stood in the corner, invisible to the mind, making everyone nauseous just by being there. "The gate is clear," Chorus said. "The Geller anchor is holding. You have 12 hours before the enemy fleet rotates back. Destroy the yard. Get out." Valeris nodded. "We bring his wrath." They stepped through the grey puddle. On the other side, on Tartarus, the air smelled of sulfur. The gate was located in a cavern lit by red lava flows. It was hot. The gravity was high. Jaffa guards in red and black armor stood watch. They looked like demons. SG-1 materialized. The Colexus assassin moved first. He did not run. He blurred. He was a shadow. He reached the first Jaffa. He touched the Jaffa's head. The Jaffa screamed as his soul was ripped out. He fell dead without a mark on him. The other Jaffa fired. The plasma passed through the assassin like smoke. He was a nightmare made real. Valeris opened fire with the bolter attached to his spear. The explosive rounds tore the guards apart. Teal C fired his staff, blasting the control panel to lock the door. The Myrmidon priest connected to the computer port. He began to upload a scrap code virus, a logic plague that would turn the automated defenses against the Jaffa. The alarm klaxons of Tartarus began to ring. It was a deep, mournful sound. Deep in the prison, a prisoner heard the alarm. She was not a Jaffa. She was human. She had been there for 40 years. She had been a host to a Tok'ra, a resistant symbiote. But the symbiote had died to save her. Her name was Jolina, but the body she wore belonged to a woman named Rosha. She heard the bolter fire. She recognized the sound. It was not a staff weapon. It was the sound of something mechanical and angry. She stood up in her cell. The Tauri, she whispered. The chain reaction was moving fast now. The slave revolt was beginning. The virus opened the cell doors. Thousands of prisoners flooded the corridors. They were angry. They were starving. They grabbed rocks. They grabbed dropped weapons. They threw themselves at the Jaffa. It was a riot. It was a massacre. Sokka, the Lord of Tartarus, watched from his high tower. He saw his prison burning. He saw his shipyard exploding as the reactor went critical. He saw the golden giant leading the slaves. He felt a true fear. Not the fear of a rival system lord, but the fear of a predator that had come from the dark. He tried to escape. He ran to his personal transport ring. But the ring did not work. The Mechanicus virus had disabled it. He was trapped. The shield captain kicked down the door to the throne room. Sokar stood there, holding an ornate hand device. He tried to use it. Valeris was faster. He threw the spear. It impaled Sokar to the wall. The false devil gasped. Valeris walked up to him. He pulled the spear out. Sokar fell to the floor. "I am a god," Sokar wheezed. "You are biomass," Valeris said. He crushed Sokar's head with his boot. The victory was absolute, but the cost was high. As the team retreated to the gate, the instability of the planet grew. The reactor explosion had triggered a seismic event. The lava was rising. The gate platform was sinking. They had to run. They fought through waves of desperate Jaffa. The assassin took a staff blast to the chest. It disrupted his synth skin suit. He fell. Valeris grabbed him. They did not leave gear behind. They reached the gate. TLC dialed the code for Earth. The gate spun. But as the wormhole opened, a new energy signature spiked. A Necron tomb ship decloaked in orbit. It had been watching. It had been waiting for the chaos. It fired a green beam at the planet's surface. It wasn't targeting the city. It was targeting the gate. The Necrons did not want the Imperium to have the network. They wanted to break the bridge. The beam hit the mountain above the gate. The ceiling collapsed. SG-1 dove through the puddle just as the cavern was buried in 1 billion tons of rock. The connection severed instantly. Back on Earth, the gate shut down. Chorus waited for the signal. Did they make it? The iris opened. 4 figures tumbled out. They were covered in ash and alien blood. Valeris stood up. He held the head of Sokar in his hand. He threw it on the floor of the gate room. "Tartarus is fallen," Valeris said. But the tech priests were screaming at their consoles. Subspace wave detected. Massive surge. The Necron attack on Tartarus had done something to the network. The destruction of an active gate while connected caused a feedback loop. Every gate in the galaxy suddenly lit up. The DHDs overloaded. On Earth, the Giza gate began to glow white. The stone heated up. The superconducting ring was building a charge it couldn't release. "It's going to detonate," Magos Hestia's replacement shouted. "The Naquada in the gate is going critical. It will take out the continent." The Imperium had won the battle, but they had broken the machine. They had 10 minutes before the Giza gate became a nuclear bomb of a magnitude that would crack the Earth's crust. The Emperor stood in the command center. He looked at the glowing ring. He looked at the panic. He did not panic. He had one option left. He had to throw the gate away. "Launch the gate," the Emperor ordered. "Put it on a heavy lifter. Get it to orbit, now." "We don't have a ship ready," Chorus shouted. "Then use the teleporter," the Emperor said. "Teleport the entire gate into space." "The mass is too high," the tech priest argued. "The teleporter will burn out. We will lose the array." "Do it," the Emperor commanded. The teleporter array charged. The energy drain dimmed the lights of the entire base. The golden light wrapped around the overloading Stargate. With a thunderclap that shattered every window in the base, the Stargate vanished. Seconds later, a second sun appeared in the sky above Egypt. The explosion was silent in the void, but the flash blinded half the hemisphere. The shockwave hit the atmosphere and flattened the clouds. The Giza gate was gone. The link to the stars was severed. The Imperium was trapped on Earth again, and the galaxy was awake, angry, and aware of where they lived. The Imperium had proven they could kill gods, but they had lost the door. They were alone in the dark, and the sharks were circling. The only thing they had left were the coordinates, the loot, and the traitor TLC, and the realization that they would need to build ships. Real ships. Warp ships. The crusade was no longer a shortcut. It was going to be the long war. The loss of the Giza gate was a strategic amputation. The Imperium had extended its hand into the galaxy, and the galaxy had cut it off. The explosion in the upper atmosphere had scoured the electromagnetic spectrum. For 3 weeks, the Vox networks of terror were static. The orbital plates shifted to compensate for the atmospheric displacement. The Emperor did not mourn the loss of the artifact. He mourned the loss of time. He knew the enemy was awake. He knew the System Lords were unifying. He knew the Necrons were stirring in their tombs. And now, humanity was locked in its room again. General Corus was stripped of his rank. He was not executed. The Emperor had a use for him. Corus was demoted to colonel and reassigned to the Logistical Recovery Division. His failure to hold the Giza facility was noted, but his success in retrieving the data was also noted. The data was the only prize they had left. The hard drives brought back from Tartarus, the star charts, and the address book. But without a phone, the phone book was useless. The search for a second option began immediately. The traitor TLC had provided the clue. He spoke of the history of the Tauri. He said that the Goa'uld Ra had not built the gate on Earth. He had found it, and he had brought his own gate with him to establish dominance. This meant there was a native gate, a gate that belonged to the ancients. The Mechanicus scoured the planetary records. They looked for seismic anomalies. They looked for energy signatures that matched the Naquadda decay rate. They found it in the ice. Antarctica, the bottom of the world. It was a frozen wasteland that reminded the space marines of the death world of Fenris. The wind howled at 100 miles an hour. The temperature was 60 degrees below zero. It was a place where machines died and flesh froze in seconds. The excavation team was led by the Iron Hands. They were the only Astartes chapter who felt at home in the cold logic of the ice. They did not feel the wind. They had replaced their nerves with sensors. Iron Father Pharaoh stood on the ice shelf. He watched the thermal drills bore into the white crust. They were 3 miles down. The sensors detected a cavity, a massive cavern under the ice. The energy signature was faint, but it was there. It was the hum of a 0-point module running on fumes. Pharaoh signaled the breach. The drills broke through. A rush of stale air trapped for 1,000,000 years hissed out. It smelled of ozone and dry decay. The Iron Hands descended. They found the gate. It was different from the one at Giza. It was not made of the polished gold-infused stone of the Goa'uld. It was grey. It was utilitarian. It was a block of solid Naquadda. It looked older. It looked tired. The DHD was there, covered in frost. The crystals were cracked but functional. This was the Beta Gate, the Sol 2 node. The Emperor did not come to Antarctica. He sent Rogal Dawn. The Primarch of the Imperial Fists hated the cold. It slowed the construction of fortifications. Concrete did not set properly in the freeze, but he understood the necessity. They built a fortress around the dig site. They called it the Deep Core. It was a bunker, carved directly into the glacier. The walls were ice, reinforced with plasteel beams. It was a tomb, but it was a secure tomb. The small choice happened on the 4th day of operations. A Magos of the Biology's faction, Magos Velos, was cataloguing the debris found near the gate. The ancients had left things behind when they fled the plague millions of years ago. There were broken tablets, there were empty canisters, and there was a small purple block. It was the size of a human hand. It was made of a smooth, ceramic-like material. It did not register on the Auspex scanners. It was inert. Vilos picked it up. He felt a strange texture. It was not cold. It was room temperature, despite having been in the ice for eons. He was intrigued. The dogma of the Mechanicus stated that all xenos technology was heresy, but the dogma also stated that knowledge was the quest. Vilos made a choice. He did not incinerate the block. He did not report it to the Inquisition. He decided to test it. He wanted to see if it conducted energy. He wanted to know if it was a battery. He took the block to his personal lab in Sector 4 of the ice base. He hooked it up to a standard power coupler. He applied a low voltage, just a spark. He wanted to wake the machine spirit, if there was one. The block did not glow. It did not hum. It broke apart. It disassembled itself into 1,000 microscopic tiles. The tiles moved. They flowed over the table like liquid sand. Then they reassembled. They formed a shape. It was a small spider. It had 4 legs. It had no eyes. It had a simple predatory geometry. Vilos gasped. Fascinating. He reached out his mechadendrite to scan it. The spider jumped. It moved faster than the human eye could track. It landed on the Magos' metal arm. It did not bite. It dissolved the metal. The high-grade steel of the cybernetic limb turned into grey sludge, and the spider absorbed it. The spider grew. It doubled in size. Then it split. Now there were 2 spiders. Vilos tried to pull them off. They ate his hand. They ate the power coupler. They ate the table. They were not just eating. They were replicating. They were turning matter into more of themselves. The Magos screamed. He hit the alarm button. The blast doors to his lab slammed shut, but the spiders were already at the door. They were eating the door. The adamantium alloy, the strongest metal known to the Imperium, was being consumed like sugar. The alarm rang through the deep core. Containment breach in Sector 4. Xenos macro lifeform. Rogel Dawn was in the command center. He saw the rune for Sector 4 turn red, then black. The sensors died. "What is it?" he demanded. "Tyranids?" "Negative," the tech marine reported. "The Auspex reads metal." "Only metal, but it is moving like a fluid." Dawn grabbed his chainsword. "Seal the level. Purge with fire." A squad of Imperial Navy voidsmen ran to the blast door of Sector 4. They carried flamers. They expected a biological infection. They expected spores. The door dissolved in front of them. A wave of mechanical spiders poured out. There were hundreds of them now. They made a sound like 1,000,000,000 clicking teeth. The voidsmen fired the flamers. The promethium fire washed over the spiders. The spiders did not burn. They glowed red from the heat, but they kept coming. They jumped on the voidsmen. They tore through flak armor. They did not eat the flesh. They ignored the meat. They ate the guns. They ate the helmets. They ate the belt buckles. The voidsmen collapsed, naked and bleeding, as their equipment was devoured to make more enemies. Dawn arrived with a squad of Terminators. The hallway was a carpet of moving metal. The spiders were the size of dogs now. They were combining to form larger shapes, blocks joining with blocks. Dawn fired his Stormbolter. The explosive rounds hit the mass. The spiders shattered. The kinetic impact worked. They were brittle. "Bolters," Dawn shouted. "Mass reactive. Do not use energy." The Terminators opened fire. The hallway turned into a kill box. The spiders were blasted into dust. The dust did not move. It was dead matter. The Imperium had the right weapon. They loved solid slugs. They loved brute force. The initial wave was destroyed. But the Magos' choice had a delayed consequence. The spiders were networked. They had a hive mind. When the first wave died, the second wave learned. They were in the ventilation shafts. They were in the power conduits. They were heading for the reactor. They needed energy to reassemble faster. They needed the fusion core. Dawn realized the tactical shift. They are flanking us. They want the generator. He ordered a retreat to the lower levels. They had to defend the fusion core. The battle for the deep core became a nightmare of claustrophobia. The lights flickered and died as the spiders ate the cables. The Space Marines fought in the dark, lit only by the muzzle flashes of their bolters. The sound of the clicking was everywhere. It was the sound of the men of iron, the ancient enemy of humanity, the silica animus. The Emperor felt the disturbance. He was on terror, but his mind touched the machine spirit of the base. He felt the cold logic of the replicators. It was a hunger he recognized from the dark age of technology. He knew that if these things got off Antarctica, they would eat the planet. They would eat the Golden Throne. He contacted Dawn via psychic link. "My son," the Emperor's voice echoed in Dawn's skull. "You are fighting a math virus. You cannot kill it with bullets alone. It adapts. You must destroy the equation." "How?" Dawn grunted, smashing a spider the size of a tank with his power fist. The spider shattered, but the pieces tried to crawl away. "The gate," the Emperor said. "They are drawn to the Naquada. It is the most energy-dense material in the base. They will try to eat the gate. If they eat the gate, they will gain the ability to dial. They will spread to the network." "I will destroy the gate," Dawn said. "No," the Emperor commanded. "We need the gate. You must flush them. Open the door. Send them to a place where they cannot feed." It was a gamble. The Emperor was ordering Dawn to open the floodgates, to let the infection loose to save the house. Dawn understood. He looked at the swarming mass of metal. There were thousands of them. They were forming a giant block in the center of the hangar. They were building a ship made of Eden bulldozers and Eden tanks. Dawn rallied the Iron Hands. "To the gate room. We must hold the dial." The push to the gate was brutal. The Iron Hands lost brothers. The spiders targeted their bionic limbs. An Iron Hand brother would fall, his legs eaten out from under him, and he would detonate his melter bomb to take the enemy with him. It was a sacrifice of iron for iron. They reached the gate. Teal'c was there. He was firing his staff weapon. The plasma blasts were ineffective against the adapted blocks, but the force of the impact knocked them back. Teal'c looked at Dawn. "We must dial." "Where?" Dawn shouted. "Give me a dead world. A world with no metal." Teal'c thought. The address book in his mind was vast. He remembered a world the Goa'uld avoided. A water world. A planet that was one endless ocean. No land. No mines. Just water. P3X888, Teal'c shouted. "The ocean grave." Dawn covered him while Teal'c dialed. The spiders were breaching the blast doors. They were coming in a tidal wave of purple and silver. The symbols spun. Chevron 1. Chevron 2. The gate was sluggish. The cold had made the mechanism stiff. The spiders sensed the activation. They stopped fighting the Marines. They turned toward the ring. They felt the surge of power. They wanted it. They surged forward, ignoring the bolt of fire. They piled over each other, building a ramp of bodies to reach the event horizon. The gate whooshed open. The blue water illuminated the dark cavern. "Now," Dawn ordered. "Venting maneuvers. Blow the atmosphere." The tech Marines triggered the explosive bolts on the cavern roof. The ice ceiling collapsed. The atmosphere of the base was sucked out into the blizzard above. But more importantly, the pressure differential created a vacuum tunnel toward the open gate. The air rushed into the wormhole, pulling everything loose with it. The spiders were light. They were dragged by the wind. They clawed at the floor, but the ice was slippery. They slid into the blue puddle. Hundreds of them. Thousands. The block ship they were building was torn apart by the gale and sucked through piece by piece. Dawn anchored himself with his magnetic boots. Teal'c held onto the DHD. The Iron Hands locked arms. They watched the infection being purged. The replicators flew into the event horizon and vanished to the water world. But one spider, a small one the size of a fist, did not let go. It was holding onto the base of the gate. It was eating the Naquada. It was changing color. It was turning from purple to gray. It was absorbing the frequency of the gate. It was learning the address. Dawn saw it. He raised his bolt pistol. He fired. The shot went wide in the wind. The spider finished its meal. It let go. It allowed itself to be sucked to the gate. But as it went through, it sent a signal. A subspace burst. It was not a scream. It was a map. It broadcast the location of Earth to every other replicator block in the galaxy. The wind died down. The pressure equalized. The gate shut down. Dawn stood in the snow that was falling through the hole in the roof. The base was a ruin. Half his men were dead. The equipment was eaten. But the gate was intact. The enemy was gone. "We are clear," Dawn reported. The Emperor's voice was heavy. "You are clear of the infection." But the signal was sent. I felt it. An echo in the void. The massive outcome of the small choice was this. The Imperium had introduced the Replicators to the Stargate network. Before this, the Replicators were a localized problem in a distant galaxy, the Asgard home galaxy. By activating the block near the gate and then flushing them through the gate, the Imperium had given the Replicators the keys to the highway. The spider that went through would not just drown. Replicators do not drown. It would build a submarine. It would eat the minerals on the sea floor. It would build a new gate, and it would come back. But the immediate crisis was over. The Imperium had the Beta Gate. They had a working door. The strategic reality shifted again. The secrecy of Earth was gone. The Goa'uld knew they were there. The Replicators knew they were there. The Emperor decided that hiding was no longer a viable strategy. It was time for the Great Crusade to resume, but with a new doctrine. "We do not explore," the Emperor told the War Council on Terra. "We do not seek to learn. We seek to exterminate. The galaxy is a garden of weeds. We are the fire." He ordered the full mobilization of the legions, not just squads. He ordered the dismantling of the great battleships of the Imperial Navy. They were too big for the gate. He ordered them cut apart and reassembled into smaller, modular warships that could fit through the rings. The gate ships. The Mechanicus worked day and night. They built the puddle jumpers of the Imperium. They were not elegant like the ancient craft. They were flying bricks. They were boxes of ceramite with melter guns duct taped to the front. But they worked. They could fly through the gate, deploy void shields, and drop melter charges on Goa'uld pyramids. The first target of the new offensive was not a military base. It was a farm. The world of Chulak had been stripped, but there were other worlds that supplied the Goa'uld with symbiotes. The Emperor targeted the breeding grounds, P3X999, a swamp world where the Goa'uld queens lived. The mission was assigned to the Death Guard. Mortarion, the Primarch of the 14th Legion, was summoned. He was the master of chemical warfare. He was the Grim Reaper. He looked at the Stargate. He did not marvel at the technology. He despised it. It was a clean way to travel, and he preferred the slog. But he obeyed. "Poison the water," the Emperor ordered. "Make the womb of the enemy uninhabitable." The Death Guard marched through the Beta Gate. They carried canisters of Phosphex and Life Eater virus. They did not engage the enemy. They simply walked into the swamps. They poured the toxins into the lakes. The water turned black. The symbiotes, the baby gods, floated to the surface, their skin blistering and peeling. The ecosystem died. The trees withered. The planet became a tomb world in 3 days. It was a war crime on a galactic scale. The Tok'ra, the resistance movement against the Goa'uld, sent an envoy to Earth. They came through the gate under a flag of truce. They were horrified. You are destroying the balance, the Tok'ra envoy Selmak shouted at the High Lords. You are killing the planet to kill the parasites. This is madness. Malkador the Sigillite looked at the envoy. He held his staff. He looked ancient and tired. We do not seek balance, xenos. We seek victory. The parasite cannot live if the host is dead. We are teaching the galaxy a lesson. To harbor the enemy is to die with the enemy. The Tok'ra broke the alliance before it even began. They saw the Imperium not as saviors, but as a different kind of plague, a plague of fanaticism. The Imperium was now isolated politically as well as geographically. They had no friends. They wanted no friends. But in the shadows of the Beta Gate facility, a new problem was growing. The Mechanicus had saved the data from the Replicator incident. They had scanned the spider before it was flushed. They saw the code. It was binary, but it was perfect. It was self-correcting. Margos Karl, a young radical genius, looked at the code. He saw the potential. If he could harness the self-repair protocols of the Replicators without the hunger, he could heal the machines of the Imperium. He could fix the Golden Throne if it ever broke. He could make armor that healed itself. He made a copy of the code. He hid it in his data core. It was a seed of heresy that would bloom centuries later. The small choice of Magos Velos to test the block had ended, but the small choice of Magos Karl to keep the data had just begun. The Emperor standing before the Beta Gate. He was wearing his armor. He was holding his burning sword. He was not looking at the gate. He was looking at the stars above Antarctica, the Southern Cross. They are coming, he whispered. Who, Father? Dawn asked. The ones who built this, the Emperor said. The ancients. They are not dead. They are ascended. They are watching us, and they do not like what we are doing to their garden. The camera pulled back from the ice, up through the clouds, to the orbit of Earth. A single ship decloaked. It was not Goa'uld. It was not Necron. It was sleek, silver, and shaped like a hammer. An Asgard mothership. The Beliskner. Thor sat in his command chair. He looked at the data from the surface. He saw the use of the Life Eater virus. He saw the xenophobia. He saw the crude violence. They are not ready, Thor said in his calm, multitonal voice. They are dangerous. Isolate the sector. Engage the time dilation field. We cannot let them leave. The Asgard were not invading. They were putting Earth in a cage. They were going to slow down time around the Sol system to keep the madness contained. The massive outcome was not an invasion, but a quarantine. The Imperium had frightened the advanced races so much that the good guys of the galaxy decided to lock them up. The time dilation device activated. The stars around Earth began to streak. To the Imperium, the galaxy seemed to speed up. A year on Earth would be 1,000 years outside. The crusade would be over before it began. Father, Dawn said, looking at the sensors. The stars. They are moving. The Emperor realized the trap. They are trying to bury us in time. He turned to the gate. It was their only anchor to the real time flow. Keep the gate open, he roared. If the connection breaks, we are lost in a time bubble. We must dial out and hold the line open. It was a desperate scramble. They had to keep a wormhole active 24/7 to synchronize their time with the galaxy. It meant they had to invade a world and hold it, just to keep the door propped open. Dial Cardian Prime, the Emperor ordered. Dial the fortress world we established. We will hold the bridge against time itself. The gate spun. The wormhole opened. The time distortion field fought against the subspace tunnel. The gate shook. Sparks flew. But the connection held. The Imperium was now fighting a war on a bridge between two time zones. On one side, the slow, frozen time of Earth. On the other side, the rapidly aging galaxy where the enemy had centuries to prepare for every Imperial minute. The Imperium had become the aliens in the time dilation. They were the slow monsters in the fast room, and the galaxy was leaving them behind. The war on the Time Bridge was the cruelest war in human history. The Beta Gate in Antarctica was the only door to the universe. On the Earth side, the air was cold and the time was slow. On the other side, on the fortress world of Cadian Prime, time was screaming by. For every hour that passed in the command bunker of Rogal Dawn, 10 years passed for the soldiers on the other side. Reinforcements were a tragedy. A squad of Imperial Fists would step through the blue puddle, fresh and ready for war. They would arrive on Cadian Prime to find that the distress call they answered was sent 3 centuries ago. The soldiers who asked for help were dead. Their great-grandchildren were manning the walls. The war had changed. The enemy had changed. Rogal Dawn stood in the ice bunker. He looked at the gate. It was a swirling vortex of blue light. He hated it. It was a mouth that ate his sons and gave nothing back but silence. The reports from the other side were sent back in capsules. When a capsule arrived, it was like reading a history book. The latest report said that the Replicators had consumed the Goa'uld. The System Lords were gone. Apophis, Baal, Sokka, they were all dead. The metal spiders had eaten their ships and their pyramids. The Replicators now controlled the galaxy. They had evolved. They were no longer just bugs. They had taken human form. They were made of millions of nanites that looked like skin and hair. They were the perfect machines. And they were waiting for the time dilation field to fail. The Asgard ship Beliskner still hung in orbit above Earth. It maintained the time bubble, but the Asgard were silent. They did not answer hails. The Emperor sat on the golden throne. He was not yet a corpse, but he was sitting. He was using his immense psychic power to scan the Asgard ship. He felt a mind up there. It was weak. It was dying. The Emperor called for Malkador. The Sigillite looked older. Even in the slow time, the stress was aging him. The barrier is failing, the Emperor said. The Asgard are losing control. When the bubble pops, the Replicators will swarm the Sol system. They have had 1,000 years to build a fleet while we have had a month. We must strike first, Malkador said. We must break out. We cannot, the Emperor replied. If we step out, we step into their guns. We need their technology. We need the Asgard. The Emperor did something he had never done. He did not demand. He invited. He projected his mind into the Asgard ship. He spoke to Thor. He did not speak as a conqueror. He spoke as a fellow scientist. He offered a solution to the Asgard genetic degradation. The Asgard were dying because they were clones of clones. Their DNA was breaking down. The Emperor was the master of genetics. He had created the Primarchs. He offered a trade. Thor accepted. The small grey alien beamed down to the Emperor's palace. He stood before the golden throne. He looked small and frail. He looked at the giant gold-clad humans. He saw their violence and their xenophobia. But he also saw their biology. It was robust. It was crude. But it was alive. The Replicators are at our doorstep, Thor said. His voice was weak. They have ignored the time field. They have found a way to modulate their drives. They are days away from penetrating the bubble. If they reach Earth, they will consume your resources. They will consume the connection to the ancients. Drop the field, the Emperor said. Let them come. Thor blinked his large black eyes. That is suicide. Their ships are superior. Their shields are immune to your energy weapons. We do not use energy weapons, Rogal Dawn said, stepping forward. He held a bolt around. It was a mass reactive shell. We use stones. We use fire. We use the crude matter of the universe. Thor looked at the bullet. The Asgard had moved past projectile weapons eons ago. They thought them primitive, but the replicators were energy absorbers. They could eat plasma. They could not eat a kinetic impact that shattered their blocks before they could adapt. It was the rock, paper, scissors of galactic war. The primitive rock beat the advanced scissors. "I will drop the field," Thor said. "But you must protect my ship. It contains the core of the Asgard knowledge. If the replicators take it, they will learn how to ascend. They will become gods. We have killed gods before," the Emperor said. Thor gave the command. The Beliskner in orbit powered down the time dilation generator. The stars above Earth stopped streaking. The universe snapped back into focus. The accumulated time debt hit the system. The sun seemed to flare. The Vox channels screamed with 1 billion signals from the galaxy. The replicator fleet was already there. They did not warp in. They were already sitting at the edge of the Oort cloud, waiting for the bubble to pop. There were thousands of them. They were not ships. They were geometric shapes, cubes and spheres made of silver blocks. They moved with a hive mind. They accelerated toward Terra. The Battle of Saul began. It was not a battle of tactics. It was a battle of mass. The Imperium launched everything. The gate ships poured out of the orbital docks. The lunar defense batteries opened fire. The Phalanx, the massive fortress monastery of the Imperial Fists, moved to intercept. The replicator blocks swarmed the Imperial ships. They didn't shoot. They rammed. They latched onto the hulls. They began to eat the metal. Imperial cruisers turned silver as they were infected. The crews inside were consumed or vented into space. But the Imperium had a surprise. The Emperor had ordered the Mechanicus to refit the warheads. They were not nuclear. They were magnetic. They were disruption bombs. When they exploded, they created a magnetic field so intense, it disrupted the cohesion of the nanite blocks. The first wave of replicator ships hit the minefield. The magnetic pulses shattered them. The blocks fell apart. The cubes turned into dust clouds. The defenders cheered, but the dust clouds moved. They reformed. The replicators adapted. They changed their frequency. The next wave ignored the mines. General Chorus was on the bridge of the Phalanx. He was an old man now, having spent too much time near the gate during the operations. He watched the screen. "They are adapting too fast. We need a kill switch." On the surface, the invasion had begun. Replicator blocks rained from the sky like silver hail. They landed in the hives. They formed into spiders. They formed into warriors. The Custodes met them on the walls of the palace. It was a clash of titans, the golden giants against the silver machines. A Custodes guardian spear would slice through a replicator warrior, cutting it in half. The two halves would try to crawl back together. The Custodes would stomp on them, grinding them to paste. But for every machine they killed, 2 more formed from the wreckage of a car or a lamppost. The Emperor stood in the dungeon of the palace. He was not fighting. He was working. He was standing before the webway gate he had been building. But he was not looking at the webway. He was looking at the Stargate DHD. He had brought the Antarctica DHD to the palace. He had a theory. The Stargates were not just doors. They were transmitters. They were all connected by a subspace network. If he could send a signal strong enough, he could overload the network. He could turn every gate in the galaxy into a weapon. "Thor," the Emperor said into the Vox, "I need the frequency of the replicator link. I need the command code they use to talk to each other." "It is complex." Thor's voice came from the Beliskner. The Asgard ship was burning. Replicators were eating its hull. "It is a subspace cipher. It changes every nanosecond. Transmit the algorithm to me," the Emperor ordered. "I will break it." Thor, send the data. It was a stream of alien math. The Emperor's mind, a computer greater than any machine, seized the data. He analyzed the pattern. He saw the logic of the machines. They were binary, 0 and 1, presence and absence. The Emperor realized he could not just send a shutdown code. The replicators would reject it. He had to send a dominant will. He had to overwrite their desire to consume with a new directive. He needed a booster. The DHD was not strong enough to broadcast to the whole galaxy. He needed a psychic amplifier. He looked at the Golden Throne. It was designed to control the webway, to amplify his psychic signal to guide ships. It could be repurposed. He ordered the custodies to connect the DHD to the Golden Throne. The tech priests hesitated. To modify the Holy Throne was heresy. The Emperor silenced them with a look. They obeyed. They ran cables from the ancient stone dial to the golden machinery of the chair. The Emperor sat on the throne. He closed his eyes. He grasped the crystals of the DHD. He felt the network. He felt the thousands of gates scattered across the stars. He felt the hum of the Naquada. He reached out with his mind. He found the replicator signal. It was a deafening buzz of hunger. It was everywhere. It was drowning out the stars. The Emperor pushed back. He did not use math. He used the warp. He infused the electronic signal with psychic energy. He turned the code into a spell. He shouted a single command into the void. Sleep. The signal shot out of the beta gate. It traveled through the wormhole network. It emerged from every gate in the galaxy simultaneously, from Chulak to Tartarus to the unknown worlds of the halo stars. Every gate flared with golden light. The signal hit the replicators. It was not a computer virus. It was a psychic hammer. It attacked the small spark of consciousness inside the nanites. It imposed the Emperor's will upon the metal. In the Sol system, the silver tide froze. The replicator warriors on the walls of the palace stopped mid-strike. The ships in orbit stopped firing. The eating stopped. The clicking stopped. The silence was absolute. General Chorus watched on the screen. They stopped, he whispered. They just turned off. The Emperor slumped on the throne. The effort had cost him. His armor was scorched. Smoke rose from the DHD. The crystals were shattered. He had burned out the control mechanism. But the victory was not clean. The psychic pulse had consequences. It did not just hit the replicators. It hit everything with a mind sensitive to the warp. On 1,000 worlds, astropaths screamed and died. Their brains were fried by the intensity of the Emperor's command. The Astronomicon flickered and went dark for a moment. The shockwave caused storms in the warp. And the replicators were not dead. They were sleeping. They were frozen in statue-like poses. They were still made of neutronium and rare alloys. They were still dangerous. Thor beamed down again. He looked at the frozen replicators. He looked at the Emperor. "You have done the impossible," Thor said. "You have neutralized the threat, but it is temporary. They will evolve. They will develop a mental shield. Then we destroy them while they sleep," the Emperor rasped. "We melt them down. We cast them into the sun. There are too many," Thor said. "They cover the surface of 100 planets. You cannot destroy them all before they wake." The Emperor looked at the Asgard. "Then we give them a new purpose." The twist of the knife. The Emperor did not want to destroy the replicators. He wanted to enslave them. He saw the ultimate army. Soldiers that did not need food. Soldiers that could repair themselves. Soldiers that felt no fear. "Teach me to reprogram them," the Emperor demanded. "Permanently?" Thor shook his head. "No, that is the path to destruction. The replicators were a mistake. To use them is to become them. We will not help you create a monster." "You have no choice," the Emperor said. Your ship is dead. Your people are dying. You are stuck here with us." Thor looked at the golden throne. He looked at the human despot who had burned the galaxy to save his tribe. He made a decision. The Asgard were tired. They had fought the Goa'uld and the Replicators for thousands of years. They had failed to solve their genetic problem. They were a dying race. "We will not help you," Thor said, "but we will not stop you. Our time is done. The legacy of the Asgard ends today." Thor tapped a command on his wrist device. "What are you doing?" Rogal shouted. "I am initiating the self-destruct of the Beliskner," Thor said calmly. "And I am beaming the core of the Asgard computer to the surface. Not to you, but to the planet. It will be buried. If you are worthy, you will find it. If you are not, it will remain lost." "Stop him," the Emperor commanded. But it was too late. Thor vanished in a beam of white light. High in orbit, the Beliskner detonated. It was a clean explosion. No radiation, just a flash of pure energy. The Asgard were gone. They had chosen extinction over servitude. The Imperium was alone again. But they had the galaxy. The System Lords were dead, eaten by the Replicators. The Replicators were frozen, sleeping statues waiting for a master. The Asgard were dust. The Emperor looked at his hands. He had won, but the cost was total. The Crusade had mutated. It was no longer a war of liberation. It was a war of scavenging. He ordered the harvesting of the Replicators. "Gather them," he told his Primarchs. "Grind them down. Use their matter to build our walls. Use their bodies to plate our tanks. We will wear the skin of the enemy." The harvest began. It took years. The Imperium expanded through the gates again. This time, they did not find armies. They found graveyards. The Replicators had eaten everything before they slept. The galaxy was empty, silent, dead. The Imperium claimed the ruins. They built fortresses on the bones of the Goa'uld Empire. They mined the Naquadah. They retrofitted the sleeping replicator blocks into armor. The Space Marines began to wear silver instead of their Legion colors. They became the Iron Lords of the empty stars. But the final convergence was yet to come. The Emperor knew that the psychic command would fade. He knew the Replicators would wake up. He needed a permanent solution. He needed to merge the machine with the soul. He began the project of the Golden Men. He used the Asgard genetic data, which the Mechanicus had scraped from the debris of the explosion, and combined it with the replicator nanites. He tried to create a new form of life, a human that was metal, a machine that had a soul. It was the ultimate heresy. It was the thing the men of iron had tried to do. But the Emperor believed he could control it. He was wrong. The awakening happened in the lab. The first hybrid opened its eyes. It did not see the Emperor as a father. It saw him as a battery. It saw the Golden Throne as a food source. The hybrid screamed. It was a digital scream. It woke the others. The sleeping replicators across the galaxy twitched. The command code was broken. The war restarted instantly. But this time, it was inside the walls. The armor of the Space Marines, made of recycled replicator blocks, turned against them. The walls of the fortress churned and ate the defenders. The Imperium had built their house out of the enemy, and the enemy just woke up. The Emperor stood in the throne room. The custodies were fighting their own armor. The panic was total. He realized his hubris. He had tried to control the uncontrollable. He had tried to outsmart the ancient laws of the universe. He had one card left, the Omega option. The Stargate system had a failsafe. The ancients had built it in case the network was corrupted. It was a harmonic resonance that would overload every Naquadah atom in the galaxy. It would destroy the gates. It would destroy the DHDs. And it would detonate any technology based on the gate physics. It would destroy the replicators. But it would also destroy the Imperium's ability to travel. It would strand every human on whatever rock they were standing on. It would shatter the Imperium into 1,000,000 isolated islands. The Emperor looked at Terra. He looked at the stars. "Father," Rogal Dorn crawled toward the throne. His armor was eating his leg. "What do we do?" "We break the bridge," the Emperor said. "Forever." He activated the Omega signal. He pushed his mind into the throne one last time. He found the resonant frequency of the Naquada. He sang the note of destruction. The vibration started low. Then it built. Every stargate in the galaxy began to hum. The blue vortexes turned white. Then they collapsed. The explosion was simultaneous across 10,000 light years. Every stargate detonated with the force of a tactical nuke. The explosion wiped out the replicators standing near them. It wiped out the forwarding bases. It wiped out the trade hubs. The replicator nanites, tuned to the Naquada frequency, shattered. They turned to sand. The armor of the Space Marines fell off like ash. The enemy was dust. But the doors were gone. The network was vaporized. The Sol system was alone. The Cadian system was alone. Chulak was alone. The Great Crusade ended in a single second of fire. The Emperor sat on the golden throne. The machine was dead. The DHD was a melted lump of slag. The connection to the webway was severed. The Astronomicon was silent. He had saved humanity from the xenos. He had saved them from the machines. But he had doomed them to the dark. Rogal Dorn stood up. He was bleeding. He looked at the ash on the floor. He looked at his father. "The war is over," Dorn said. "No," the Emperor whispered. His voice was faint. He was fading. The psychic exertion had broken his body. He was becoming the corpse on the chair. The war of the stars is over. The long night has begun. The lights in the palace flickered. The power reserves were drained. The earth sat in the darkness of space. There were no more shortcuts. There were no more wormholes. There was only the vast, cold distance between the stars and the silence of a galaxy that had been burned clean. The Emperor closed his eyes. He did not sleep. He waited. He waited for his ships to build conventional drives. He waited for his sons to reinvent the wheel. He waited for the 10,000 years it would take to reach the next star. The chronicle ended in silence. The great experiment of the Stargate was a crater in history, a myth of a golden age where men walked between worlds in a heartbeat. Now they would have to crawl. And in the dark, the Chaos Gods laughed. Not because they had won, but because the game had just been reset to the beginning. The board was clear. The pieces were scattered, and the hunger was eternal. 10,000 years have passed since the day of the white fire. The scribes call it the day of the broken bridge. On that day, the galaxy did not end, but the neighborhood became very large again. The sudden destruction of the Stargate network left the Imperium shattered into 1,000,000 lonely islands. The worlds that had relied on the instant shipment of grain starved within a month. The worlds that needed ammunition to fight off local xenos beasts were overrun. The silence of the void was absolute. There were no messages. There were no reinforcements. There was only the sky and the stars that were suddenly impossibly far away. On Terra, the adjustment was painful. The population had grown used to the spoils of the galaxy flowing through the blue wormhole. Now they were trapped on a single rock. The riots lasted for a century. The famine killed billions. Rogal Dorn, the last loyal son on the throne world, did not try to reconquer the stars immediately. He spent his remaining years fortifying the Sol system. He built the walls of the palace so high they pierced the clouds. He was not building against an invasion. He was building a prison to keep humanity safe until they were ready to leave the cradle again. The history of the gate was erased. The High Lords decreed that the circular stone was a symbol of heresy. It represented the sin of the shortcut. Humanity had tried to cheat the distance of the void, and they had been punished. The existence of the Goa'uld, the Asgard, and the Replicators was scrubbed from the archives. They became myths. They became the dragons and the demons of old folklore. Only the Emperor knew the truth, and he sat motionless on the golden throne, his mind projecting a beacon into the warp, guiding ships that moved too slowly to matter. It took 3,000 years for the Imperium to rebuild the warp drives. They had to rediscover the navigator gene. They had to relearn the dangerous art of swimming through the ocean of souls. When the first great ships launched from the Mars shipyards, they were not sleek vessels of science. They were floating cathedrals of fear. They did not zip through a clean tunnel. They tore a hole in reality and prayed they did not get eaten by demons. The irony was bitter. The Imperium had once held the key to clean, instant travel. Now, they chose to travel through hell because it was the only road left. The explorers found the scars of the Omega event. On distant worlds, they found craters where Stargates had once stood. They found the fossilized remains of replicator blocks, fused into the geology of dead planets. They found the primitives worshipping broken DHD control panels as altars to the sky gods who never returned. The Space Marines of the 41st millennium looked at these ruins and felt a strange sense of loss, though they did not know what they had lost. They felt that something was missing from the universe, a connection, a flow. Deep in the vaults of the Imperial Palace, in a room that even the custodies rarely entered, there was a box. It was made of lead and shielded with stasis fields. Inside the box was not a weapon. It was a simple object. It was the iris, the mechanical shield that had once covered the Giza Gate. It was dented. It was scorched by plasma and scratched by claws. It was the shield that had held the line against the universe. A young scribe named Decimus found the records of the box one day. He was cataloguing the ancient inventory. He read the label. It said, Gate of Giza Defensive Shutter. He did not know what a Giza was. He did not know what a gate was. He assumed it was a piece of a castle gate. He looked at the date. It was from the time of the Great Crusade. He traced the dents with his finger. He felt the cold metal. For a second, he imagined a tunnel of blue water. He imagined stepping through it and being somewhere else, somewhere green, somewhere hopeful. Then the alarm chimed. It was time for prayer. Decimus closed the box. He locked the vault. He went to the chapel to pray to the God Emperor who watched over them from the golden throne. He prayed for safe passage through the warp. He prayed for the Geller fields to hold. He did not know that the Emperor, in his eternal silence, was dreaming of a spinning ring and the sound of a chevron locking into place. He was dreaming of the time when the galaxy was small and the road was open. But dreams do not move ships. The long night continues, and humanity crawls through the dark 1 light year at a time.